The old photograph lay nestled in a forgotten box, its edges softened by time, and its colors muted to sepia tones. It was a typical family portrait from the late 1990s, the kind you might stumble upon in an attic, evoking a gentle nostalgia for a bygone era. In the center stood the Miller family, David, the patriarch, his arm around his wife, Sarah. Beside them, their two children, Emily, a blossoming teenager with a shy smile, and young Michael, a boy of about 7 or 8, his small hand clasped loosely in his mother's. They were all dressed in their Sunday best, their faces beaming with what appeared to be genuine happiness, a perfect picture of domestic bliss frozen in time. But as your gaze lingered, a subtle imperfection began to surface, a whisper of unease that scratched at the edges of the idyllic scene. Perhaps it was the lighting, a peculiar shadow clinging to the right side of the frame, distorting the vibrant colors into something slightly sickly. Or maybe it was the almost imperceptible warp in the old photographic paper, a tiny ripple that seemed to pull at the fabric of the image, making it feel just a fraction off kilter. The photo, unearthed from a dusty cardboard box filled with discarded memories, had been forgotten for years, its secrets buried under layers of other people's lives. Then, your eyes drifted to Sarah, the mother. Her smile, initially perceived as warm and inviting, now seemed to stretch a little too wide, a touch too fixed, almost like a mask. It was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, leaving them with an unsettling blankness. And then, you noticed her hand. It rested on young Michael's shoulder, a seemingly innocuous gesture of maternal affection. But as you focused, truly looked, the normalcy dissolved. It wasn't merely resting, it was gripping. Her fingers, splayed in an unnatural, almost claw-like fashion, appeared to be digging into the fabric of Michael's shirt, perhaps even into his small shoulder beneath. The angle was all wrong, the pressure palpable even through the faded photograph. It was a possessive hold, a desperate clench that belied the cheerful facade. This tiny detail, once observed, became impossible to unsee. It was a jarring note in an otherwise harmonious composition, a discordant chord that resonated with growing unease. The happy family, once so picture-perfect, now seemed off. The smiles, particularly Michael's, which now looked less like genuine joy and more like a grimace of forced compliance, felt utterly fake. The light, which had initially seemed bright and cheerful, now appeared ominous, casting long, unseen shadows that twisted the narrative of the image. The feeling it evoked was not one of immediate shock, but rather a slow, creeping dread, a chilling realization that something was profoundly wrong. It wasn't a jump scare designed to yank you from your seat, but a gradual, insidious understanding that seeped into your consciousness. Michael's eyes, once seen as bright and innocent, now held a flicker of something akin to fear, a desperate effort to maintain the illusion of happiness for the camera, for his mother. The hand, Sarah's hand, was not a gesture of comfort, but a symbol of control, a silent assertion of dominance. The more you looked, the more the image unraveled, revealing a hidden layer of tension and suppressed emotion. The warmth of the family portrait chilled into something cold and unsettling, leaving you with an indelible sense of discomfort, a lingering question mark hanging over the cheerful smiles and the seemingly innocent embrace. The Miller family, despite their unsettling portrait, had arrived in Blackwood Creek in the early 1990s, seemingly just another family seeking a quiet life away from the bustle of the city. David, the father, was an engineer, his work often pulling him away for days, sometimes weeks, at a time. Sarah, his wife, had settled into the role of a stay-at-home mother, her days ostensibly filled with the domestic rhythms of raising 2 children. On the surface, they presented themselves as perfectly normal, respectable, blending seamlessly into the small, tight-knit community. Yet, even in a town accustomed to its share of eccentrics, Sarah Miller gradually began to stand out, though her peculiarities were often dismissed as mere quirks. Her protectiveness over her children, particularly Michael, was intense, bordering on suffocating. While most children in Blackwood Creek spent their afternoons exploring the woods or playing pickup games in dusty fields, Michael's outdoor excursions were rare. Sarah always had an excuse. The weather was too cold, too hot, Michael wasn't feeling well, or he had homework that simply couldn't wait. She preferred to keep her family to themselves, rarely engaging in the potlucks, bake sales, or casual neighborhood gatherings that formed the social fabric of the town. Neighbors would extend invitations, only to be met with polite but firm refusals, often accompanied by Sarah's overly sweet smile that somehow made the rejection sting even more. People, being people, merely shrugged it off, concluding that Sarah was just a bit eccentric, perhaps a little overprotective, a common enough trait in mothers of young children. Nothing to truly worry about, they reasoned, especially when David, during his brief stints at home, seemed utterly unfazed by his wife's reclusive tendencies. Michael, even at a young age, was a quiet, withdrawn child. He rarely spoke up, his voice barely a whisper when he did. When other children, with their boundless energy and innocent curiosity, tried to engage him in games or conversation, Michael would often shrink back, his gaze instinctively darting toward his mother. It was as if he sought her permission, her silent approval, for every small action, every tentative step outside her immediate sphere of influence. This habit was particularly noticeable to the school teachers and a few observant parents who occasionally interacted with the Miller children. They noticed how Michael's demeanor would visibly relax only when Sarah wasn't in direct line of sight, only to tense up again the moment she reappeared. Blackwood Creek was a small town, where secrets were hard to keep, and whispers traveled faster than the wind through the pines. Soon, the subtle oddities surrounding Sarah began to coalesce into a quiet undercurrent of gossip. People spoke of Sarah's intense, unwavering stare, how her eyes seemed to follow Michael's every move, even from across a room. They'd remark on how Michael never seemed to have his own opinions, his answers often echoing his mother's sentiments verbatim, as if he were merely a mouthpiece for her thoughts. There were murmurs about the way Sarah would sometimes grip Michael's arm a little too tightly when she thought no one was looking, or the almost imperceptible flinch Michael would exhibit at sudden movements from his mother. These were not accusations, merely observations, threads of unease woven into the fabric of daily life, too fleeting to constitute concern, too persistent to be entirely ignored. David, in his role as the often absent engineer, remained largely oblivious to these subtle tensions and the growing whispers. When he was home, his focus was on the brief respite from work, on the superficial tranquility of his family life. He saw a well-kept home, two seemingly well-behaved children, and a wife who, in his eyes, was simply a dedicated, if somewhat intense mother. He'd often laugh off Sarah's quirks, dismissing any concerns with a wave of his hand and a simple, "Oh, that's just Sarah. She's a doting mother, that's all." He was a man who, by nature or by choice, avoided conflict, preferring to smooth over any potential ripples rather than confront the deeper currents beneath the surface. His perception was clouded by his own desire for a peaceful home, a sanctuary from the demands of his career. He didn't see the silent terror in Michael's eyes, the way the boy seemed to hold his breath whenever his mother was near. He didn't notice the subtle shift in Emily's once bright demeanor, now tinged with a quiet watchfulness that belied her years. David saw what he wanted to see, a perfect family, and anything that challenged that image was conveniently reframed or simply ignored. This willful blindness, this convenient absence, allowed Sarah's subtle control to fester and grow, unchecked and unchallenged, slowly, but surely tightening its grip on young Michael. As Michael transitioned from a quiet child into adolescence, Sarah's subtle, almost imperceptible control began to escalate, transforming into an overt and suffocating grip. She micromanaged every facet of his existence, leaving no corner of his young life untouched by her pervasive influence. His friendships, or rather, the distinct lack thereof, were meticulously scrutinized. Any potential friend who didn't meet Sarah's exacting, often unspoken criteria was subtly but effectively pushed away. His hobbies, which were few and far between given his restricted world, were either dismissed as frivolous or redirected toward activities she approved of, usually academic pursuits that kept him confined and under her direct supervision. Even his food choices, down to the brand of cereal or the type of fruit he ate, became subject to her strict regulations, all justified under the guise of ensuring his optimal health and well-being. The invasion of his privacy became routine. She would intercept his mail, claiming to organize it, but in reality, she was screening for anything that might connect him to the outside world beyond her purview. His phone calls, rare as they were often listened in on, Sarah hovering nearby with an innocuous task, her ears keenly attuned to the conversation. When confronted, she would feign innocence, her wide, unblinking eyes conveying a wounded surprise. Her justification for this relentless intrusion was always the same, delivered with a tone of earnest concern. The world was a dangerous place, full of temptations and pitfalls, and Michael, her sensitive boy, needed her constant vigilance, her unwavering protection. She painted a picture of herself as a selfless guardian, shielding him from an inherently corrupt external world, a narrative she repeated so often that it began to erode Michael's own sense of self-worth and autonomy. Emily, Michael's older sister, was no longer a child herself, and her teenage eyes, increasingly sharp and discerning, began to see through the fragile facade of their mother's protection. She watched with a growing sense of horror as Michael slowly but surely withered under Sarah's suffocating grip. She saw the fear, raw and palpable, in Michael's eyes whenever he dared to voice an opinion contrary to their mother's, or when he attempted to assert even the slightest sliver of independence. Sarah's response was always swift and chillingly effective, a cold, unyielding stare that could freeze a room, or a sharp, subtly demeaning word that cut Michael down with surgical precision, leaving him feeling foolish and ashamed for even trying. Emily, driven by a protective instinct for her younger brother, tried to intervene on several occasions. She would gently suggest that Michael needed more freedom, that he should be allowed to make his own choices, to experience the world beyond their mother's carefully constructed bubble. But each attempt was met with Sarah's terrifying intensity. Her mother would turn on her, not with anger, but with a calculated, almost venomous disappointment. Sarah would twist Emily's words, making her feel selfish for suggesting Michael might need anything other than his mother's unwavering care. "You don't understand, Emily," Sarah would say, her voice deceptively soft. "Michael is delicate. He needs me. You're just jealous of our bond." Emily would retreat, burdened by a heavy guilt, convinced that she was somehow wrong, that her desire for Michael's freedom was a betrayal of their family, of their mother's love. Sarah's campaign of isolation was devastatingly effective. Michael rarely attended parties, his invitations somehow always getting lost or Sarah having a prior engagement for him. He struggled to form close friendships, not just because of Sarah's interference, but because he himself had become so withdrawn, so unsure of his own identity outside of his mother's shadow. School became a source of immense anxiety. He was terrified of speaking up in class, of making a mistake, of drawing any attention to himself that might displease his mother. His world, once filled with the potential of childhood, shrunk inexorably, confined to the ever-narrowing parameters of his mother's expectations. He existed only to fulfill her vision of him. Michael, by his mid-teens, had become a mere shell of a person, a meticulously crafted automaton performing the role of the perfect son that Sarah so desperately demanded. He excelled academically, his grades impeccable, not out of genuine passion for learning, but out of a paralyzing fear of failure and his mother's disapproval. He was unfailingly polite, almost eerily so, never arguing, never questioning, always deferring. He moved through life with a quiet compliance, his eyes often downcast, his shoulders slightly hunched as if bearing an invisible weight. But underneath this polished, obedient exterior, there was a growing emptiness, a silent scream that no one, not even Emily, could truly hear. His true self, his individuality, was being systematically erased, replaced by an echo of his mother's desires. David, oblivious and emotionally distant, continued his pattern of absence. When he did return home from his engineering projects, he saw what he wanted to see: a well-behaved, academically successful son and a devoted wife who managed the household with an iron yet invisible hand. He didn't perceive the silent terror that clung to Michael like a shroud. He didn't notice the suppressed individuality, the slow extinguishing of a young spirit. He saw a tranquil domestic scene, a testament to his wife's dedication and his own provision. He was either genuinely blind to the insidious nature of Sarah's control, or, perhaps more accurately, he chose to remain blind, finding comfort in the illusion of a perfect family rather than confronting the uncomfortable truth that simmered beneath the surface. His continued denial, his emotional unavailability, inadvertently provided the perfect environment for Sarah's control to flourish, to tighten its suffocating hold on Michael, leaving him increasingly vulnerable, increasingly lost within his own life. The boy who once looked for permission in his mother's eyes now simply ceased to look for anything at all, his gaze mirroring the blankness of a soul slowly being consumed. Michael, now a teenager, had found a small, secret outlet for his stifled individuality, a quiet rebellion against the suffocating control that defined his existence. He had secretly developed an interest in photography, a pursuit Sarah would undoubtedly deem frivolous, a waste of time that pulled him away from his true path of academic excellence and dutiful compliance. With a cheap second-hand film camera he'd painstakingly saved for, he started sneaking out, usually at dusk or dawn, to capture the fleeting moments of beauty he found in the isolated landscape surrounding Blackwood Creek. The rustling leaves, the dappled light filtering through the trees, the intricate patterns of frost on a window pane. These were his stolen moments of freedom, his silent conversations with a world that existed beyond his mother's watchful gaze. Each click of the shutter was a small act of defiance, a quiet assertion of his own perspective, his own nascent artistic voice. It was a fragile, precious secret, a tiny flicker of hope in the growing darkness of his life. But secrets in Blackwood Creek, especially those within the Miller household, had a way of being discovered. Sarah, with her unnerving intuition for anything that deviated from her carefully constructed reality, eventually found his camera. She discovered the rolls of film carefully hidden beneath loose floorboards in his closet, and the small collection of developed photos, mostly landscapes, a few blurry self-portraits, all imbued with a melancholic beauty. Her reaction was not the loud, explosive rage one might expect, but something far more terrifying, a terrifyingly calm anger that chilled Michael to his core. Her voice remained even, almost conversational, yet each word was laced with a venomous criticism that flayed his spirit. She spoke of his waste of time, his disobedience, his foolish pursuit of something so utterly useless. She systematically dismantled his nascent passion, convincing him with chilling precision that photography was a bad influence, a distraction, leading him astray from the true path she had so painstakingly laid out for him. She painted it as a dangerous indulgence, an open door to influences that would corrupt his sensitive nature and undermine his future. Her logic, twisted and self-serving as it was delivered with such conviction that Michael, already so vulnerable, began to believe it himself. The camera was confiscated, the photos destroyed, and another small piece of Michael's soul was extinguished. Emily, who had observed Michael's fleeting moments of joy with his camera and then his subsequent crushing defeat, could no longer remain silent. Seeing the light in Michael's eyes dim completely, his spirit almost visibly crushed under the weight of their mother's relentless control, she decided to confront Sarah directly. It was a desperate, courageous act, fueled by a deep-seated love for her brother and a growing resentment towards her mother. "You're destroying him, Mom," Emily exclaimed, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and righteous anger. "You're suffocating him. He needs to live his own life." Sarah, however, remained unmoved. Her response was delivered with a chilling intensity, her eyes devoid of warmth, fixed on Emily with an unnerving calm. "I am saving him from himself, Emily," she stated, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. You don't understand the dangers out there. He needs me. He needs my guidance, my protection. You are simply too young, too naive to comprehend the complexities of the world and how easily a sensitive boy like Michael can be led astray. It wasn't a rebuke, but a definitive statement, a declaration of her unshakable conviction, leaving no room for argument or dissent. The palpable unhappiness that now radiated from Michael was so profound that even David, in his carefully constructed bubble of denial, could no longer ignore it completely. During one of his rare visits home, he tried, hesitantly, to talk to Sarah. He suggested therapy, perhaps for Michael, or for the family as a whole. He even ventured to suggest that Michael might benefit from a little more freedom, a chance to explore his own interests, to make his own choices. Sarah listened, her expression unreadable before slowly, meticulously, turning his suggestions around. She twisted his words, making him feel like he was undermining her, that his attempts to help were actually an accusation, an insinuation that she was failing as a mother. "Do you think I don't care about our son's well-being, David?" she asked, her voice laced with a wounded tone that was expertly calculated to elicit guilt. "I dedicate my entire life to these children, to his future, and you suggest I'm doing something wrong? You're never here. You don't see what I see, the challenges he faces. Perhaps you should be more present if you want a say in how he is raised." She skillfully manipulated his own guilt and his inherent aversion to conflict until he backed down, defeated, once again retreating into his work and his convenient absence, leaving Michael even more exposed and unprotected. This final, crushing blow sent Michael retreating further into himself, a withdrawal so profound it was almost absolute. He stopped photography, abandoning the last vestige of his personal identity. He stopped trying to connect with Emily, understanding, perhaps, that her efforts were futile against their mother's unyielding will. He became even more compliant, almost robotic in his obedience, his movements precise, his responses rehearsed, his entire being a reflection of his mother's demands. The light in his eyes, once a faint flicker, seemed to dim completely, replaced by a vacant stare that mirrored the emptiness within. It was in this precise period of profound emotional suppression, after this intense and crushing conflict, that the family portrait was taken. A forced moment of happiness, a carefully constructed tableau designed to project an image of perfect familial bliss, masking the deep-seated terror and silent suffering that had become Michael's constant companions. The forced smile on his face in that photograph was not one of joy, but of profound resignation, a silent testament to a spirit utterly broken. Years, long and silent years, had passed since that photograph was taken, since Michael's spirit had been systematically dimmed to a mere flicker. Emily, now an adult, found herself sifting through the dusty remnants of her father's life, a somber task after his recent passing. In a forgotten box, tucked beneath faded financial records and yellowed newspaper clippings, lay the old family portrait, the one taken in that brief, unsettling window of forced smiles and carefully constructed normalcy. As she held the rectangular piece of photographic paper, its edges softened with time, a wave of memories, both poignant and painful, washed over her. The ghost of Michael's silent suffering, the palpable tension that had permeated their home during those years, resurfaced with an almost physical ache. She stared at the image, at the forced smiles that now seemed like grimaces, at her father's distant gaze, and then, as if drawn by an invisible thread, her eyes landed on her mother's hand, on Michael's shoulder. This time, it was different. This time, with the clarity of adulthood and the painful wisdom gained from years of hindsight, Emily saw it not just as a tight grip, not merely a possessive hold, but something far more insidious. A subtle discoloration on Michael's shirt beneath the hand, or perhaps a faint, almost invisible indentation on his skin, became sickeningly apparent. It looked like a bruise, a mark, a dark, almost imperceptible stain on the fabric of their manufactured happiness. It was a detail so small, so easily dismissed, yet now it screamed at her from the past, This horrifying detail ignited a cold fury within Emily, a slow-burning rage that had been simmering beneath the surface for decades. She remembered Michael's constant accidents as a child, the inexplicable falls, the sudden bumps, the unexplained bruises that Sarah always brushed off with a dismissive wave of her hand and a plausible, yet always slightly too elaborate explanation. "Oh, he's such a clumsy boy," she would coo, or, "He just ran into the table, didn't you, sweetie?" Michael, ever compliant, would merely nod, his eyes downcast, never contradicting their mother. But now, those casual dismissals, those seemingly innocent incidents, took on a sinister new meaning. Emily felt a primal urge to understand, to uncover the truth buried beneath layers of denial and carefully crafted lies. She began to dig. She rummaged through more boxes, searching for other old photographs, scrutinizing faces, arms, shoulders for any similar telltale signs. She even considered trying to access old medical records, though she knew that would be a near impossible feat. She searched for anything, any scrap of evidence that might shed light on her mother's behavior, on the true nature of that seemingly innocent hand. As Emily delved deeper into the past, forgotten memories, once suppressed by the passage of time and the desire to forget, began to resurface with startling clarity. She recalled specific, unsettling moments, fragments of a childhood tainted by a subtle dread. There was the time Sarah had gripped Michael's arm with sudden, alarming sharpness during a minor argument about playing outside, leaving faint red marks that Sarah quickly covered with a long-sleeved shirt. The way Michael would flinch, an almost involuntary reflex whenever Sarah reached for him, even for a seemingly benign touch. The way Sarah would quickly, almost aggressively, change the subject if anyone, even David, dared to inquire about Michael's minor injuries, her voice adopting a sharp, defensive edge that brooked no further questions. These weren't just isolated incidents. They were pieces of a disturbing mosaic, each fragment contributing to a picture far darker than she had ever allowed herself to acknowledge. The seed of doubt, once planted, began to blossom into a terrifying certainty. This wasn't just about emotional abuse or overprotective parenting anymore. Not merely the suffocating control that had defined Michael's youth. The mark on the photo, undeniably a bruise, combined with these resurfacing, unsettling memories, planted a horrifying, chilling seed of doubt in Emily's mind. Was her mother not just psychologically damaging Michael, but physically harming him too? And was that hand in the portrait, the one that had always seemed so possessive, so controlling, not just a symbol of her psychological grip, but a veiled threat, a silent warning, a physical manifestation of something far more sinister? The seemingly benign family portrait had transformed into a chilling document, a silent scream frozen in time, revealing a truth too terrible to contemplate, yet too obvious to ignore. Emily knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she had to find out what truly happened. The past demanded answers, and Michael, wherever he was, deserved the truth. Emily knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she had to find out what truly happened. The past demanded answers, and Michael, wherever he was, deserved the truth. The weight of this realization settled heavily upon her, a moral imperative that left no room for hesitation. She couldn't simply let this go, not after seeing the undeniable evidence of physical harm, however subtle, staring back at her from the faded photograph. This wasn't merely about understanding her mother's pathology. It was about confronting a deeply buried injustice, a silent trauma that had scarred her brother for life. Her first step was to return to Blackwood Creek, the small, isolated town that had once been their home, a place she hadn't visited in years, deliberately avoiding the ghosts of her past. The journey itself felt like traversing a temporal rift, each mile bringing her closer to the unsettling memories she had so carefully compartmentalized. The town hadn't changed much. The main street still boasted the same few businesses, the houses still huddled together in their quiet, unassuming way, seemingly untouched by the passage of time or the dark secrets they might hold. It was a place where everyone knew everyone, and where secrets, once whispered, could echo for decades. Emily began her quiet investigation by seeking out old neighbors, former teachers, anyone who might have known the Miller family during those formative years. It was a painstaking process, often met with polite but firm resistance. Most were reluctant to speak, their eyes darting away, their voices lowering to hushed tones. "Oh, the Millers," they'd say, a subtle shift in their demeanor. "Such a good family, so private." Or, "I didn't see anything, dear, truly." The collective amnesia of a small town, a silent pact to avoid unpleasant truths, was a formidable barrier. Yet a few, perhaps burdened by their own unspoken observations, offered cryptic remarks. Mrs. Henderson, their elderly next-door neighbor, now frail and living alone, spoke of Sarah's intensity, a quality she described as both admirable and unsettling. "She was dedicated, that Sarah," Mrs. Henderson mumbled, her gaze fixed on a distant point. "But Michael, he was always so quiet, wasn't he? Like a little shadow." A former elementary school teacher, now retired, remembered Michael as a withdrawn, almost ethereal child, always looking tired, with vague, frequently changing excuses for missed school days or a sudden aversion to playground activities. "He never quite seemed himself," the teacher recalled, a frown creasing her brow. "Always seemed to be looking over his shoulder, even when his mother wasn't around." Driven by a growing sense of urgency, Emily decided to confront the official records, however difficult they might be to access. She managed to track down the local clinic that had served Blackwood Creek during their time there. With a carefully constructed story about needing family medical history for an inheritance claim, she was eventually granted limited access to Michael's childhood records. What she found confirmed some of her darkest suspicions. There was indeed a record of Michael having a minor concussion when he was around 8 years old, attributed by Sarah to a fall from a tree. The doctor's notes, however, contained a telling observation. Mother highly anxious, extremely protective, borderline obsessive. Patient appears subdued, avoids eye contact. Sarah was listed as the sole informant regarding the incident, her account unchallenged. The phrasing, borderline obsessive, resonated deeply with Emily, echoing the suffocating control she had witnessed firsthand. It wasn't definitive proof of abuse, but it painted a picture of a mother whose anxiety and overprotective nature masked something far more disturbing. With the town offering only fragments and official records providing only hints, Emily knew she needed to go to the source of her childhood trauma, the old Miller house. It was no longer theirs, having been sold years ago after David's passing. She managed to track down the current owners, an elderly couple who were surprisingly amenable to her request to revisit her childhood home for sentimental reasons. They allowed her to look around, giving her a key and a few hours of unsupervised access. The house, though maintained, felt foreign, yet unsettlingly familiar. Each room held echoes of a past she desperately wanted to understand. She moved through the empty spaces, a detective in her own personal crime scene, searching for anything that might have been left behind. A hidden diary, an old letter, anything that could confirm her suspicions, anything that could give voice to Michael's silent suffering. She checked beneath loose floorboards, behind bookshelves, in the back of dusty closets, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. It was in Michael's old room, now a guest bedroom, that Emily finally found something. Tucked away in a small, almost invisible cavity behind a loose section of baseboard, she discovered a small wooden box. It was plain, unassuming, and covered in a fine layer of dust. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, carefully folded and preserved, was a collection of old, faded drawings Michael had made as a child. They were not the typical vibrant, innocent scribbles of a young boy. Instead, they were disturbing, unsettling images that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. Stick figures crudely drawn, yet imbued with a haunting emotional resonance. Many featured exaggerated hands, disproportionately large and claw-like, gripping the shoulders of smaller, cowering figures. Some of the faces had X's for eyes, or were depicted with wide, gaping mouths, screaming silently. Other drawings showed small figures trapped within cages, their limbs reaching out in desperation. One drawing in particular seized Emily's breath. It clearly depicted a figure, unmistakably a child, with a giant menacing hand clamped tightly on its shoulder. From where the hand made contact, small, sharp, jagged lines radiated outwards, like bursts of pain, like silent screams rendered visible. It was a chilling testament, a visual diary of hidden torment, undeniable proof of the physical and emotional abuse Michael had endured. The hand in the family portrait was not just a symbol of control. It was a shadow of the pain Michael had depicted in his art, a horrifying confirmation of Emily's darkest fears. The box of drawings was a silent scream, finally heard. The box of drawings was a silent scream, finally heard, echoing through the empty rooms of the old house and resonating deep within Emily's soul. With this undeniable, heartbreaking evidence clutched in her hands, her next step was clear. She had to find Michael. He was the missing piece, the only one who could articulate the full horror of what those drawings depicted, what that hand in the portrait truly represented. It took several weeks of diligent searching, sifting through old-school records, contacting distant relatives, and even hiring a private investigator, but Emily eventually tracked him down. Michael, now an adult, was living in a small, nondescript apartment in a town a few hundred miles away. His life, Emily quickly observed, was a quiet, isolated existence. He worked a mundane job, kept to himself, and seemed to possess an almost preternatural ability to blend into the background. He was emotionally stunted, a man-child trapped in an adult body, struggling profoundly with relationships, exhibiting chronic anxiety, and perpetually afraid of making the wrong move, as if still living under the scrutinizing gaze of his mother. He was a shadow of the boy she remembered, a person whose light had been extinguished long ago, leaving behind only a faint, flickering ember. Emily approached him cautiously, mindful of the fragility she sensed emanating from him. She introduced herself, reminding him of their shared past, of the bond of siblinghood that had been strained but never fully broken. At first, Michael was wary, his eyes darting around the room, his body language tense and defensive. He recognized her, of course, but the years of isolation and trauma had built an impenetrable wall around him. Emily didn't push. She spent days, then weeks, simply being present, sharing innocuous memories, slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding a fragile bridge of trust. When the time felt right, Emily gently confronted Michael with her findings. She started with the family portrait, pointing to the almost imperceptible mark on his shoulder. Then, with a heavy heart, she showed him the childhood drawings she had found in the old house. She watched his face as he looked at them, a flicker of something akin to recognition, then panic crossing his features. At first, he denied everything, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "They're just drawings, Emily," he muttered, trying to hand them back. "Kids draw strange things sometimes." He deflected, tried to change the subject, his conditioned response to protect his mother, even from himself, kicking in with a fierce, automatic precision. The years of gaslighting, of being told his perceptions were wrong, had deeply ingrained a mechanism of self-preservation that involved burying the truth. But Emily persisted, her voice gentle yet firm, unwavering in her conviction. She expressed her profound love and concern for him, telling him she knew he had been hurt, that she had seen the signs, however subtle, and that it wasn't his fault. She told him that she believed him, even if he couldn't yet believe himself. She spoke of the weight she had carried, the gnawing feeling that something had been deeply wrong, and how these drawings and the mark on the photograph had finally given her the courage to seek answers. Slowly, painstakingly, Michael started to crack. The wall he had built around himself, brick by brick, began to crumble under the relentless warmth of her unconditional love and unwavering belief. He didn't recall full, coherent memories at first. Instead, fragments emerged, like jagged shards of glass from a shattered mirror, feelings of dread, of being perpetually trapped, of a nameless, pervasive pain. He remembered the hand, not just a gentle touch, but a constant, suffocating pressure. The fear, ever present, like a second skin. He remembered the silent moments, the way his mother's eyes would bore into him, a silent command that transcended words, demanding absolute obedience. He remembered the pressure, the way her fingers would dig into his shoulder, a physical manifestation of her psychological grip, a constant reminder of her power over him. He remembered the flinching, the involuntary recoil, the way his body had learned to brace itself for the inevitable even when he couldn't articulate why. Through Michael's fragmented memories, pieced together with Emily's own resurfacing recollections, and the tangible evidence she had gathered, the full, horrifying truth began to emerge, stark and chilling. Sarah wasn't just overprotective, she was deeply, pathologically abusive. The hand in the photo, once a perplexing detail, transformed into a terrifying symbol. It wasn't just a grip of control. It was a physical manifestation of her psychological and, yes, physical torment. The accidents Michael had suffered as a child, the concussions, the unexplained bruises, were not accidents at all. They were inflicted by her. The grip in the family portrait, captured for posterity, was a veiled threat, a silent warning, a potent reminder of her absolute power, even during a seemingly happy, manufactured moment of family togetherness. It was a chilling testament to her ability to inflict pain and control under the guise of maternal love. The depths of Sarah's pathology were slowly revealed. It became clear that she suffered from a severe, undiagnosed mental illness, perhaps a form of Munchausen by proxy, or a complex personality disorder that had warped her perception of reality. She genuinely believed she was saving Michael, protecting him from a dangerous, corrupt world, molding him into the perfect son she envisioned. In her twisted mind, her actions, however cruel, were acts of love, of ultimate sacrifice. She believed she was shielding him from harm, when in fact she was the greatest source of his pain. Her protection was a cage, her love, a weapon. She had created a world where Michael's identity was completely subsumed by her own, where his every thought, every feeling, every action had to be filtered through her approval. The hand on his shoulder in that photograph was not a gesture of affection, but a brand of ownership, a constant suffocating weight that had crushed his spirit and left him a fragile, broken man. The truth, when it finally coalesced, was a devastating blow, yet also, paradoxically, a strange, painful liberation. The truth, when it finally coalesced, was a devastating blow, yet also, paradoxically, a strange, painful liberation. For Michael, it was the first step on a long, arduous journey toward healing. Emily, with newfound determination, became his unwavering advocate. She immediately sought professional help for him, finding a therapist specializing in trauma and childhood abuse. It was not an easy process. Michael's trust issues ran deep, ingrained over decades of manipulation and fear. He struggled to articulate his feelings, to confront the memories that surfaced like jagged icebergs from the depths of his subconscious. There were setbacks, moments of regression, where the old patterns of self-blame and denial resurfaced. But Emily was there, a constant, gentle presence, reminding him that he was safe, that he was loved, and that he was not alone. Slowly, painstakingly, Michael began to mend. Therapy provided him with tools to process his trauma, to understand that his mother's actions were a reflection of her own illness, not a measure of his worth. He learned to identify and articulate his emotions, to set boundaries, and to differentiate between genuine care and manipulative control. He started to find his own voice, a voice that had been silenced for so long. He explored hobbies he had once suppressed, even picking up a camera again, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence. The act of capturing images, of framing his own perspective, became a powerful form of self-expression, a reclamation of the individuality his mother had tried so desperately to erase. It was a long, difficult road, paved with tears and painful revelations, but with each step he grew stronger, more resilient, more himself. He began to understand that he wasn't responsible for his mother's actions, that he was a survivor, not a victim. Sarah, the architect of Michael's suffering, remained largely untouched by these revelations. She was old now, her mind clouded by the passage of time and the progression of her own untreated mental illness. Emily had considered confronting her, demanding answers, but ultimately decided against it. There was nothing to be gained. Sarah was living in a quiet, isolated existence, perhaps in a care facility or alone in a small apartment, still utterly convinced she had been a good mother. Her reality was so deeply distorted that any attempt to present her with the truth would have been futile, met only with confusion or a chilling, uncomprehending denial. Her punishment, in a way, was her own isolated existence, devoid of genuine connection or understanding, and the profound, irreparable damage she had inflicted upon her children. She never truly understood what she had done, never acknowledged the monstrous acts committed under the guise of love. She remained trapped in her own delusional narrative, a prisoner of her own making. The family portrait, that seemingly innocuous artifact, remained. But now, it told a different, far more complex story. It was no longer just a picture of a smiling, happy family from the late 90s. It was a chilling testament to hidden abuse, to silent suffering, and to the insidious, corroding nature of control disguised as maternal affection. The mother's hand on her son's shoulder, once an almost unnoticeable detail, had transformed into the key to a dark, deeply buried secret. It was a silent scream captured in amber, a frozen moment of torment that had finally been understood. Emily kept the photograph, not as a memento of a happy past, but as a stark reminder of the truth, a testament to her brother's resilience, and a silent warning. Emily, having navigated the treacherous waters of her family's past, found a profound sense of peace. She reflected on the insidious nature of abuse, how it could hide in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of daily life, even in a seemingly perfect family photo. She understood now that appearances could be deceiving, that the most serene surfaces could conceal the deepest, most turbulent currents. Her journey had been one of painful discovery, but it had also been one of immense growth and purpose. She had uncovered the truth, not just for herself, but for Michael, giving voice to his silenced pain and helping him reclaim his stolen life. She finally found solace in knowing she had done everything in her power to bring light into the darkest corners of their shared history. The story of the Miller family, of Sarah's twisted love and Michael's silent suffering, serves as a stark, unsettling reminder. It is a warning about the complacency of perception, about the dangers of accepting surface-level narratives without questioning what lies beneath. We often miss the signs, dismissing subtle oddities as quirks, overlooking discomfort as mere unease. We are quick to judge what we see, but slow to question what we don't. This narrative underscores how appearances can be profoundly deceiving, how the most terrifying stories are not always found in haunted houses or dark alleys, but can be hidden in the most ordinary, seemingly innocent places. They can lurk in the quiet corners of suburban homes, behind closed doors, and sometimes they are captured forever in plain sight, in an old, faded family portrait. It implores us to look closer, to listen more intently, and to never underestimate the power of a single, seemingly insignificant detail. For sometimes that small detail, like a mother's hand on her son's shoulder, can unlock a lifetime of unspeakable pain and reveal a truth too terrifying to ignore. It reminds us that the monsters are not always under the bed. Sometimes they are the ones tucking us in,